Welcome once again to our reading of Why the Cross. In this episode, we will be thinking about the final hours and the spectators. Jesus was subjected to humiliating mockery as he hung on the cross, which he accepted without protest or retaliation. The Gospels record him speaking 7 times during the crucifixion, and we can note some of them here. The first was to ask God's forgiveness of those responsible for his torture and execution. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Luke 23:34. He also commended his mother Mary to the care of his faithful friend the Apostle John, who was standing beside her. John 19:26-27. As the end drew near, Jesus cried, "I am thirsty." John 19:28. A soldier dipped a sponge into a jar of sour wine, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it to his mouth. John 19:29. A gesture that would have done virtually nothing to quench his raging dehydration. Soon afterwards, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Then breathed his last. Luke 23:46. In earlier times, it was common in certain cultures to hoist the corpse of an executed criminal on a pole or tree as a final mark of shame. However, Old Testament ceremonial law ruled that the body should not remain there overnight, but should be buried on the same day, or the land would be defiled. Deuteronomy 21:22. In the case of Jesus and the 2 criminals crucified alongside him, the defilement would be worse, as the next day was a special Sabbath, John 19:31. which fell during Passover week. The religious authorities had been viciously dishonest in hounding Jesus to death, yet they now insisted on maintaining ritual purity by observing this prohibition and asked Pilate for permission to remove the bodies for burial. The usual way of making sure the victims were dead before taking them down was to have soldiers break their legs, when the shock would have ended their lives. Pilate agreed to this, and the soldiers broke the legs of the 2 criminals. Turning to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. But to make certain, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. John 19:34. Immediately after the death, the blood in the chambers of the heart clots fairly quickly and then separates into plasma and red blood cells. A spear plunged into a person's side near the heart would have released these 2 fluids, which a layman like John might well describe as blood and water. On the other hand, as well as enlarging the heart chambers with blood, the shocking trauma Jesus suffered during the scourging and crucifixion could have caused such a buildup of fluid in the pericardium, a sac of fibrous tissue surrounding the heart, that a spear piercing this soon after death and before the blood congealed would have produced a flow of blood and water. Whatever the exact explanation, one thing is certain. What was left hanging on that middle cross was a blood-soaked corpse. So far we have looked at what led to the crucifixion of Jesus and the horrific event itself. To understand what really lay behind it, we now need to take a much closer look at the victim. We can do this from several different angles, all recorded in the Bible. There was nothing unusual about crucifixion at that time. The Jewish historian Josephus records that around 40 BC, Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Roman governor of Syria, had 2,000 Jewish rebels crucified in a single day. Crucifixion was usually reserved for slaves, the worst of criminals, military deserters, traitors, and rebels against the state. To add to its humiliating nature, crucifixion was a public event, and 3 crucifixions due to take place at the same time would probably attract a fair-sized crowd. What did they make of Jesus? For the members of the execution squad, he was just another criminal, and putting him to death was just another day's work. Once they were satisfied that they had nailed Jesus' naked body firmly to the cross, the 4 soldiers concerned each claimed 1 piece of his clothing. They then gambled to decide who should have the 1 remaining. See John 19:23-24. Before taunting him by shouting, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." Luke 23:36 and 37. Many in the watching crowd were nothing more than idle onlookers who had assembled for this spectacle and just stood by watching. Luke 23:35. For some, reports of his claims and miracles would ring hollow now that he seemed unable to resist the Roman and Jewish authorities. They derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Matthew 27:39 through 40. The religious leaders who had hounded Jesus to death joined in the mockery. He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross and we will believe in him. Matthew 27:42. The robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Matthew 27:44. Some had very different emotions. For Mary, Jesus' mother, standing by the cross, there was the terrible trauma of seeing what was being done to her firstborn son, while other family members and close friends would also have anguished over what was happening. Even without family ties, followers of Jesus, John is the only one of the 12 disciples specifically mentioned as being present, followers of Jesus would have been devastated at seeing their dearest friend humiliated, tortured, and put to death in this way. Some onlookers may have been seeing Jesus for the first time, and some may have come across him earlier that week when he was teaching daily in the temple, Luke 19:47. Yet for his closest followers, their agony was mingled with memories of previous 3 years spent in his company, and what memories they must have shared.